Dominic, hello.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm good. It's great to speak to you. So Dominic wrote the score for 1999, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about that. But I was wondering if you could start by talking to us about your background and sort of your previous work.
Yeah, so I did a master's degree in film scoring at Bristol University back in 2010, which seems like yesterday, but it's 14 years ago. I've written for several short films and one feature-length film, but film music is only really a small portion of what I do as a composer. The rest includes stuff like classical songs, educational piano books, musical theatre, and I'm even hoping to write an opera one day, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years. And my sort of day-to-day work is playing piano for choirs and orchestras and doing classical solo stuff.
And when you first read through the script and watched sort of some early cuts of it, were there any like sounds or styles of music or particular instruments that you thought immediately would be suitable?
I think, well, in your first email, you mentioned Carol of the Bells, the version that's in Home Alone. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to have some sort of female choir as a sort of a ghostly presence, warning her, protecting her, being her sort of guide. Also, she starts with that CD that she listens to. So I wanted some sort of chill out ambient music. So I wanted some sort of synth sounds that you might hear at a spa, really, sort of imagine yourself on a beach, that kind of sound. And then we've got this unsettling tone as well to contrast with that. So I picked two instruments which are not commonly heard in most film music, which are a cymbalom, which is a Hungarian hammer dulcimer, and a contrabass clarinet, which is a giant clarinet. And to me, it's literally like, I don't know, 7 foot tall or something. And it sounds like a sort of an unpleasant, slimy snake. I'll see if I can load up the patch. So that's the sound I wanted for Mark.
Yeah.
Sort of a bit slimy and creepy and sort of low and, in contrast to the high bell-like sounds.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting, because my next question actually was about sort of balancing the creepiness and the eeriness with the comedy side.
Well, I tried to keep it mostly serious. Like, I didn't have funny music as such. I think the comedy comes from just, the way the music starts and stops, and you have some eerie music, and then suddenly you have a zing sound. Which is, so the sort of the comedy comes not from the music itself. I sort of take it quite seriously, and the comedy is understated and sort of sarcastic and understated, I think.
So how did you approach creating themes for Mark's character?
So from a theory perspective, if you think of a standard chord of like G minor, has three notes. Now if you imagine the notes that are just outside of that chord, above and just below, they create a sort of bit of a question mark in your mind. So the theme of the film overall is, so there I'm lingering on the wrong notes and skipping over the right notes. So that gives a sort of not quite right feel to the music, like a bit, it's comfortable, but it's sort of slightly off kilter. I've got this cymbalom sound, which sounds like a piano, but like a weird version because it's not quite right. So again, even the sounds themselves are sort of, I recognise that, but it's not quite what I expected. But you have this little thing that just goes, and I have that all over the place. So you've got, and so it's like, what key are we in? Is that meant to be? Is that what your ears can't work out what chord it is? And it's like, oh no, it's tense. So that gives you, whenever you hear that, it's like a scary moment.
And I wanted to ask too then about Lacey, because that bar music at the start kind of comes back, but it changes and develops at different times.
Yeah, so the whole film starts with her listening to this CD, and that sort of represents her safety and security. So that's what it means in the film, and you hear it twice more, I think maybe 3 times. When she's hiding in the kitchen, she's like enclosed, and therefore she's safe. And you have, it's quite peaceful, and because of the notes in the chord are, well, I won't go into the theory too much, but they're basically just major thirds, as opposed to Mark's music, which is just sort of weird notes, whereas her notes are sort of chilled. So we hear it 2 or 3 times to represent her safety and her security and her sense of being at home. the choir sort of represent different things. They're all her. They're her thoughts or her guides, basically. So at the beginning, they're warning her. I think they sing da-dum, da-dum, almost like saying "oh no" or "watch out" or something like that. And then when they sing again in the second iteration of her theme, which is like an angel's chorus of like, "Yes, I'm comforted." And at the end of the film, they're laughing at her, thinking "you silly girl" or whatever.
Yeah.
So the choir have a role in the film as a sort of ghostly presence, commenting on the action as it progresses.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Could you talk to us about your whole process and what's the first thing you write? What's the last thing you write? How do you approach something like this?
The first thing I do when I'm doing any film score, whether it's one like this or whether it's planning to play a silent movie, is I go through and just sit down and write down the story as I interpret it. I just work out what's actually happening in terms of the beats and the structure and the characters. I could get it wrong. Often I've done scores where I thought someone had committed suicide, but actually they were killed, and I'd written music that made sense from my interpretation, but not the director's interpretation. So I write the story down, check with the director, is that correct? Then I'll go through each scene with a metronome and work out how many bars and beats I got to hit certain moments in the film, whether it's knock on the door, someone falling over, and it could be like I have a regular number of beats. So it could be like, normally in music you have 2s and 4s and 8s, where I could have 7. It could be like 5, 6, 7, door knock. And I've got to work out whether I can have 7 at that tempo, or I think let's have 6 at a slower tempo. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, door knock. And does that tempo work? And it's got to go, it's working out the number of beats so that it sounds completely natural, but actually there's maths going on in the background. So I will write at the piano with pencil and paper, and then I'll go and I'll do that for the whole score. And when that's sort of complete and I know what I'm doing, I'll write out the full version. There's the first few notes of the film written in a very neat way so that I can read it. So the first piece I wrote was actually the last piece with the end credits, because that's sort of an unbroken. There's not any action to catch in that scene so much. It's just literally a piece of its own right. Yeah, so that piece was written first, and then I use little fragments and motifs from that piece and seed them earlier, so that when the listener hears it, they think that's just an inevitable consequence of what's come before, even though it's written in reverse.
So, would you mind playing us something from the film?
Yeah, so the simplest thing that I can play from the film, because a lot of it is written for unusual instruments, is Lacey's chill out music, which is just a very simple progression of 4 chords. Someone told me it sounds like Danny Elfman. It's sort of a bit, well, you'll hear why in a minute. And then door knock.
That is fabulous. Well, Dominic, thank you for speaking to us.
Yeah, normally music is just sort of not spoken about in words. It's just like there are the notes on the page, but there's so much that goes into it.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's been so much good feedback about the music. It's always something that people mention once they've seen the film. So, come everybody, yeah. Speak soon then.
Speak soon. Good night. Good night. Goodbye.
Goodbye. See ya.